Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today I'm going to show you 7 different ways to use this poison tail mold. We got our lead pot turned on. We're going to set the mold on top to preheat, and we'll get to the first one. So the first thing we're going to make is a swim jig, which is what this mold is designed for. We've got our Mustad 32886 hook in here. We've got our Teflon base hole pin. We're going to make one of these in the 3/8 ounce size. And if you're wondering about this hook, I actually have a video, I'll link it down below, of modifying this mold to fit this hook. It's a heavier wire than what it originally calls for. But first round, the first use is obviously what it's designed for. We're going to make a swim jig. There is your swim jig head. So these Teflon pins just pull right out after powder coating, and you leave that hole in the top of the head so you can put your weed guard in place. But this is the first run. We're gonna cut this sprue off, get it cleaned up and ready to powder coat. This is what your jig head is gonna look like after you get it all cleaned up. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pour the lead for all of the different variations. We're going to powder coat everything at the same time. We'll tie it all up, and then we'll check all 7 options out at the end. So let's get to number 2. Now for options 2 and 3, we're going to make the jig head the exact same way. We've just got our hook in place, and we're going to place this little Teflon pin to where it's right at the base of that head. We just want to eliminate the hole for a hook slot. We want this to be a solid head. We're going to do the exact same thing for numbers 2 and 3, and then I'll show you the difference in the 2. So this is what you get after pouring that. You can see there's not a hole in the top of the head for a weed guard. You just have that little bump sticking up. We're going to cut that off, file it flat for both of these, and then I'll explain the difference. We got these all cleaned up, and as you can see here, there's no hole in the top for a weed guard. So for the first one, we're going to fish it just like this. We're going to powder coat it and use it as a swim bait jig head. Now for the second one, what we're going to do with this is option number 1 for making a bladed jig. So you can get these blades from, I think it was Queen's Tackle. I'll leave all components linked down below, but you can see where it has this little pin that goes through the blade. And you're actually just going to take that pin out, run it through the hook eye, and then you have a direct connection bladed jig. Both of the bladed jigs that we're going to show you today, I would recommend not trying to sell because Z-Man does have their patent on the direct connection, but it doesn't stop you guys from being able to make your own. We're going to hook all these up after powder coat. We'll show you all that once we get everything ready to go. So this is options 2 and 3. And we're going to get on to number 4. For the 4th option and the second bladed jig option, you're going to need a spinnerbait hook and one of these wire forms. This is the same wire form for making underspins. I think it's the WEY 525 wire form, but I'll leave everything linked in the description. So you're going to place that wire form up there where the hook eye would normally go, and then run the back of it through your spinnerbait hook. Get everything lined up. This can be kind of tricky to get it all lined up, but you're just going to get that lined up in the mold. You're going to put your Teflon pin, the same as the last 2, right there at the base of the head. You'll get your lead poured, and then we'll show you the next step. So this is what you're left with when you pour it with that wire form and spinnerbait hook. You can see up here there's a little bit of flashing on the inside of that hook eye. I just take my little X-Acto knife, stick it in, cut those off, clean everything else up the same way, and then you're ready for powder coat. So there we have it all cleaned up. You can see the inside of that wire form is nice and open now. We still have no little spot for a weed guard. You could make it with a weed guard if you wanted, but I prefer without. That is number 4, and now let's get on to number 5. And for this next one, you are going to need to modify your mold a little bit. You can see where I've cut a groove there and down here. And that is for our spinnerbait wire form. For this one, you're going to hook your wire form into your spinnerbait hook. Some guys will crimp that down just to make it a little bit easier for laying it in your mold. As long as you're pretty careful with it, it's not too bad. You're just going to lay your wire form and your spinnerbait hook in the mold. Same as all the rest. You're going to put that little pin in there just to prevent a hole for a weed guard because we don't need it on this one. And now we're ready to pour. And there you have the beginnings of your spinnerbait. Same as before, cut off the sprue, clean off that little nub. There you have your spinnerbait all ready to go for powder coat. That is number 5, and now let's get on to number 6. All right, for number 6, you're gonna need another spinnerbait hook. And if you notice back here, yes, that is a buzzbait wire form. Now the standard wire form, and this is the tiny size, because this is the 1/4 ounce size. If you see, if I lay the buzzbait in where the spinnerbait was, this piece over here doesn't, it wouldn't let the mold close. So instead of grinding another slot in this, I just took another one and just bent it out ever so slightly so that when I lay this in the mold, it will actually sit in this other cavity and I don't have to worry about grinding on my mold anymore. So we're gonna put this wire form in, we're gonna make this one, and then I'll show you what it looks like. So there you have your poured buzzbait. You can see how where the hook eye normally goes fills in with lead. You're just gonna clean all that off. So we're gonna get this cleaned up, and then I'm gonna show you how to get this wire bent into the correct position. All right, so we got our lead all cleaned up, and now we need to get this wire form back into the correct position. So I'm gonna take these little wire forming pliers. I don't really know the name of them. So we're gonna bend the top of that back down from where we bent it so that it would fit in the mold. And then once we get that, you want that to be fairly parallel to this main line right here. You can leave it bent out just a little bit if you want a little more clearance and freedom of movement for your blade. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to make this main wire bend to where it's running parallel to the hook shank. Now you could try to just grab right here, push on the wire and bend it over, and it might work, but you might blow the lead out on the bottom. So I would just take your little wire forming tools, the same as before. Just give that a little bend, and you can kind of manipulate it by hand. You can see we went just a little bit too far. So bend it back just a hair. And then, as long as your hook and this main wire are pretty in line with each other, and I don't mean like this wire directly over the hook, but just both of them going in the same direction, you'll be good. Now, one thing I do want to touch on with this is an amazing open water buzzbait. What I mean by that is if you want to throw this up underneath like overhanging trees, anything where you're not coming over the top of cover, this is phenomenal. I am not very good at skipping a buzzbait, but you can skip this thing like a dream. Now, the reason it's not real good for coming over cover is because right here where the wire form comes and then it dips down under the head, you will get caught on grass right here just a little bit. So if you're wanting something that you can throw over the top of some sloppy stuff, you'll want to find something that doesn't have this little lip that sticks down. But if you're wanting open water to where you can throw like in and around overhanging trees, this is phenomenal. So that is number 6. We're actually going to move on to the powder coating, and while that's powder coating while the powder coat is baking, I'll show you number 7 because that one does not need to be powder coated. We got all those powder coated up. We're going to throw them in the toaster oven. We're going to get that baking, and while those 6 are baking, I will show you number 7. All right, for number 7, what you're going to need, if I can get this to focus, I took one of the hooks that this mold calls for and cut the top of it off. And what we're going to be making are some punching hubs for making custom skirted punch hubs. So you're going to lay that hook in the mold, and as you can see, I got some tape right here, because with the hook eye not being up in the top, there's nothing keeping that hook from just falling out. So we're going to put that in place. The purpose of this pin right here is literally just to keep lead from shooting out. It really doesn't matter. But we're gonna, let me lift this up so you guys can see. You just want to tape it to where that hook shank is centered in where that bait keeper and little spot for your skirt are gonna, or where they would be. And once I get this made, it'll make a little bit more sense for you guys. So we're gonna pour one of these up and I'll explain what we're doing. All right, so this is what you're left with after you put that little cutoff hook and the little pin in place. It, at a glance, kind of looks like just a regular little jig head. However, the hook doesn't go up into here. It stops right up here at the base of the head. Now, this hook being in the middle serves a couple different purposes. So what I do, take my little snips, and I'm just gonna clip right up here at the top of this little lip. Just kind of work my way around it. And then you'll feel it kind of break loose. Once it starts spinning, you can pull that off. And now you have your little punch hub. Now what this hook also does, you can leave your punch hub on this hook and clamp it in your vise so that you can tie the skirt onto it. And then when you're done, you just slowly break this loose, wiggle it back and forth until it comes off of the hook. This one's hanging up a little bit, but there we go. So then you have, if you can see, the hole goes all the way through, and now you have a nice little punch hub. And then the last thing I do is I'll take an X-Acto knife or whatever I want and kind of just spin it around the opening of this, because you don't want any sharp burrs where your line is actually going to go through it. So this is a great way to make your own little custom punch hubs. Now we're going to go ahead and get some skirts tied on this one. We'll tie the rest of these jigs, and then I'll show you how to attach all of your blades. While I'm waiting on those other jig heads to cool off, I figured I'd show you guys the purpose of this punch hub and the skirt in case any of you are not familiar with it. So this is just a standard punch rig. I got an 1.25 ounce weight, heavy flipping hook, and this is the little Menace grub from Angling AI. So in the middle of summer, punching is a great way, or a great technique to use, because those fish will get up in that real heavy, thick, matted grass and they cool off in the shade. Well, because it's so hot, sometimes you need the secondary action that a skirt can give you. Well, a regular jig, they do make punching jigs, but I feel like it's just not quite as easy to use. So sometimes you kind of want a jig profile in a punch setup. So you take one of your punch hubs, tie whatever skirt pattern you want. We just tied up just kind of a natural brownish orange crawl pattern. And the way you're going to do this is when you are setting up your punch rig, you're going to add this between your weight and your hook. That's the reason why we didn't worry about powder coating the punch hub itself. We didn't want to run the risk of clogging up the hole that the line goes through, and the whole thing is covered, and honestly powder coating it is just kind of unnecessary. So you can add one of these punch hubs to your favorite punch setup, and now you have a skirted profile, and you're going to get that secondary action of the skirt in whatever your favorite punch rig is. You can add one of these punch hubs to any punch setup that you want, and they work really well. But that is the purpose of the punch rig. Now we're going to get the rest of those jigs tied up. We'll show you how to add all the blades, and then we'll check it all out. And there you have it, guys. That is all 7 ways to do it. The last thing we got to do is get all the blades and hardware added. We're going to start over here with these chatterbaits. We'll finish with the wire baits, and then we'll check it all out at the end. So for this first one, this is the one that we made with just the standard hook in this mold. And then you're going to take this blade. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it's from Queen's Tackle, but I'll have it all linked down below. And as you can see, you have this little bar that runs across on the bottom and these 2 little tabs that hold it in place. So on the back side, if I can get it to focus, you can see one side of that bar is folded over quite a bit, and then the other side is just sitting there. So what you're going to do is the side that's just kind of sitting there in that hole, you're going to bend this tab up. You're going to pop that wire loose, slide the hook eye on, put the wire back in, and then crimp these 2 little guys back down to keep it from moving. It's pretty hard to get it on camera, but I'll see if I can get it good enough to where you guys can see what's going on. All right, so we're going to start by trying to bend out this first tab. I'm just going to put this little pick in there. See if we can get that wire to pop out. All right, so there you can see that wire is hanging down. And what you're going to do is you're just going to take the eye of that hook, wedge it up onto there. So then you have the eye of your hook through that little blade. You got to bend this little tab back down. So you can bend it down with your fingers just to kind of get it to hold everything in place. And then I'm going to take some pliers. Let me grab them real quick. And I'm just going to crimp both of those little tabs down so that neither one of those sides can pop loose. And there you have a direct connected bladed jig. Really cool little blade design. It works really well. It has a pretty erratic hunting action. It doesn't thump quite as hard as like a jackhammer or anything like that, or the other style that we're going to show. But if you don't want to deal with trying to get those wire forms and doing all the bending back and forth of that wire form, this is a really good option. And now, speaking of that wire form, I'm going to show you the second way to do this. All right, and for this one, you can see the wire form. We have that little bit of a gap right there between the wire form and the jig head. Now, what you're going to need for this, you're going to need whatever blade you want. You can get them in a bunch of different options. You can get them from AliExpress. I know Barlow's keeps them. The only thing with these is finding these, you just have to search the right thing. Sometimes they call them like dancer blades. Some places call them like swimming jig blades. So just Google around. I'll leave a couple of options linked down below. But you're going to need blades, and then you're going to need a snap. So I use these P-Line Duo Lock snaps in a size 2. And all you're going to do is run your snap through those top 2 holes on the blade. And then to connect it to your jig head, you're going to take your blade and you're going to slide it right through that little gap. Put your blade on like so, and then you're just going to take a pair of pliers and bend that little wire form shut so that the blade can't come out. You can see there's still just a tiny gap right there, but that blade can't come out. It's on there really well. So this style of chatterbait or bladed jig, whatever you want to call it, this will thump a little bit harder than that other style. This is the more preferred style compared to the Queen's Tackle blade, but both of them really good options. This one just takes a few more steps. You got to buy spinnerbait hooks, you got to buy the wire form, the blades, the snaps, get everything, piece it all together. This is probably the better product. The other one is just easier to make. But that is the second way to make a bladed jig. Now let's move on to spinnerbait. All right, and for spinnerbaits, the way I make mine, I need 3 beads, 2 spacers, a clevis, a swivel, and then my blades of choice. So this one is a size 4 willow leaf blade, just in nickel color. And then I have a size 3.5 in a white pearl. Those are the blade combos that I'm going to use for this jig. So when you're looking for beads, just make sure, really the only thing you need to make sure is that the diameter of that hole is bigger than your wire form so that it'll actually slide on. So the way I make mine, if I can get that on there. So I put one bead on, then you're gonna take your smaller blade with your clevis. Now, when you're putting this on, you can see how you have I think that's concave surface and then your convex surface. The side that's curved outwards is the side you want facing forward. So make sure when you put that clevis on, you have that blade facing the right direction. So I'm going to put that clevis and blade on there. I'm going to put my second bead on there. And then after the second bead, I'm going to put both spacers on there together. I'm going to put one more bead, and now we're ready to bend our loop up here at the top. So when I'm bending the loop at the top, I take these little wire pliers again. I just grab the top and I'll loop it around, and what I do is I get it about to right there. I don't fold it all the way. And then I'll take my swivel, and I like to use ball bearing swivels on these, and I take my second blade and hook it on the loop, and then I'll finish bending that wire and close off that little loop. Once I get it as far as I can with those, I'll take my pliers, finish bending it up to where that blade can't fall off, and now you have your top blade connected and a finished spinnerbait. Yep, again, there is the finished spinnerbait. Just bead, clevis with blade, bead, two spacers, a third bead, and then your swivel and blade at the top. And now you have a completely finished spinnerbait with that one. And now the last thing we got to put on is our buzzbait blade, and then we're ready to check all these out. Buzzbaits are a little bit easier. You need your blade and you need your little pop rivet. That's really the only two things that you need to add your blade onto your buzzbait. Now, one thing I do want to mention is what I do. So this tab right here, when you have your blade sitting on there, it's going to be the tab that's resting against the rivet. So you can see it's kind of hard to get on camera, but that's not a perfect 90-degree angle. It's kind of tilted up. So what I like to do is bend that down. Let me grab my pliers again. Bend that down to where it's at a 90-degree angle, because what that's going to do, let me find my rivet. Yeah, it's right there. So when that tab is at 90 degrees, it's going to sit flush on that rivet, which is going to add to the squeak and make it a little bit louder. If it's at an angle, it'll do one of two things. At an angle, it'll kind of make the blade wobble just a little as it rolls around, which if that's what you want, then go for it. But I like bending that flat to where it's going to sit flush on that rivet because it just makes it a little bit louder, which is what I like in my buzzbaits. The top one doesn't really matter too much, but all you have to do for these is you're going to slide your blade on. Make sure that the blade goes through the top little tab, goes through the hole in the middle, and then through the bottom tab. And then you're going to take your little rivet, you're going to put it on there, and then so there's two ways you can do this. What a lot of people do is when they get that rivet on there, they'll grab this little wire and get it to where you can see it. They'll just bend it straight down, and now it's there. Your blade's on, everything's there, and it'll work just fine. What I like to do is take my little flush cut snips, and I'm going to move that blade or the rivet up just a little bit so that it's not resting on that little bent wire, and I'm just going to crimp it. I'm going to crimp it a couple times, and what that does is that locks that rivet in place to where it can't move, and it makes the blade rub against it. It increases the friction between the blade and the rivet and just adds a little bit more noise. And that is how I like to run my buzzbaits. Like I said, this is a really, really good buzzbait if you're throwing in like open water or skipping up underneath treetops and stuff. But because of that, where the head of the bait kind of sticks down a little, it will get caught on grass a little bit. but for open water applications, this is phenomenal. You can also make this without a skirt, which I do sometimes, and just thread your favorite swim bait on there, and it works really, really well. So that is the last piece of hardware. We're going to get all these together and we're going to check them all out. So the first one we made is what the mold is actually designed for, and that is just your standard swim jig. This is probably one of my favorite swim jig head types. I really, really like this one for that. So there's your option number one. Option number two, just put your base hole pin in to eliminate that hole for the weed guard, and you have a great little swim bait jig head. This is a phenomenal option for that as well. You can tie a skirt if you want. I leave it off when I'm using this for jig heads and just slide the swim bait all the way up, and that little collar right there, which is normally where you tie your skirt, acts as a secondary bait keeper and locks those swim baits on really well. The next one we made was, So the next one we made was the first option for a bladed jig, where you make it with your standard hook, add one of these Queen's tackle blades, and you have a great little bladed jig option. This is a really, really cool design. These Queen's tackle blades, I've caught several fish on these, and I was concerned with how strong this little wire was. I've never had one break. I'm not saying they won't. I'm just saying I've never had one break on me. So I have confidence throwing these little guys. The second bladed jig option is the more popular one. I know several people have videos on modifying these molds. I know that guy Skimpy has a ton of lead mold modifications. Definitely go check him out if you're interested in customizing anything on the lead mold side of things. But this one, we've got our spinnerbait hook, we've got our wire form, we've got our blade of choice, and that P-line snap. This one is probably my favorite option as far as the two bladed jigs. It does take a little more work, but I feel like it is definitely worth it. So option 2 for bladed jigs. We then moved on to wire baits, where we've got this great little spinnerbait. This poison tail jig head just looks great. Like, the profile of it is one of my favorite jig head styles. It's just a very natural little bait fish profile. This little color pattern right here with that white blade is really, really nice. I really like these spinnerbaits. This one in particular is a really light one. It's only a 1/4 ounce head. I use this for fishing super, super shallow water, like 3 feet of water and less. But yeah, great little spinnerbait. The second wire bait option was the buzz bait. I don't think I've actually seen anybody show making buzz baits out of these, but if you like throwing buzz baits with paddle tails, definitely look into this little mold or this style of buzz bait. Like I said, I am not that great at skipping baits, but you can skip this little guy as far up underneath the dock as you can. It'll make you feel like you know how to skip a bait throwing one of these guys. If you haven't skipped buzz baits, definitely give it a shot. Really, really cool. Like I said, this is a tiny blade. It's a really small wire form. I really like this for small ponds and creeks and stuff like that. I'll bump up to the bigger size and the bigger blades if I'm going out to lakes or like tidal systems, deltas, stuff like that. But really, really cool option for buzzbait. And then last but certainly not least was using that cutoff hook to make our little punch hubs. If you like punching, definitely try this out. You can tie whatever skirt pattern you want, and it gives you that jig presentation in a punching profile. Like I said, the skirt, what a lot of people overlook for punching, the skirt just adds that secondary movement. After you punch down through the heavy stuff, you've got those little skirt strands just floating around, and in the middle of the summer, sometimes that secondary action is what you need to key in on those bites. But yeah, so that is all 7 ways to use the poison tail mold. There might be more options. If you guys know other ways, let me know. These are the ways that I use it most of the time. Very, very cool little mold. And this is just a way to show you can simplify lure making. You don't need to buy, 7 different molds if you don't want. You can make all of these baits out of one mold. You can get the smaller size, you can get the bigger size. The smaller size mold has 1/8 ounce, 1/4 ounce, and 3/8 ounce. and then the larger size has half, 3/4, and 1 ounce sizes. Just get whichever one that you're going to be using the most. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate all the support, all you guys continuing to watch, and all the positive feedback. I really like the direction that the channel's going. Let me know if you like these videos where we show how to simplify stuff. If you want to see an in-depth video on any one of these baits or techniques, definitely let us know in the comments. We can make it happen. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.